What up, what up, what up? It's your man Sean P coming in live. This is Sean P Experience. It's not a regular show. This is the early morning edition. That's right. Wipe your eyes, get your orange juice, get your breakfast sandwich, whatever your beverage of choice is. It is the weekend. My weekend drinkers. It's 5 o'clock somewhere. But nevertheless, I got man, this is beyond a guess. This is the interview, but it's just two homies talking, chopping it up, catching up. This has been years in the making. I finally got my sister in the building, Emely Rumble in the building. How you doing, my sis?
I am so happy, man. When you hit me with the what up, what up, what up, that just set the tone right there. Because you know what it is when it's the Sean P Experience. I'm just happy to be here.
man. Shout out to the guests coming into the chat. As I say all the time, man, leave your questions and comments in the chat. I'm going to try to address whatever I can in real time while we rocking and rolling. Let me get my sister the proper introduction. I have my sister, Emely Rumble, LCSW, is a distinguished licensed clinical social worker, school social worker, and a seasoned psychotherapist with over 14 years of professional experience. Committed to making mental health service more accessible, Emely specializes in the transformative practice of bibliotherapy. Rumble is passionate about advocating for the integration of creative arts and psychotherapy, mental well-being, and self-improvement. Emely champions the social model of disability and embraces a neurodiversity affirming therapeutic approach. Emely's work has been featured in respected publications such as Parent Magazine, School Library Journal, Days Magazine, Success Magazine, Bronx Net News, The Bronx is Reading, Essence Magazine, CNN Health, The New York Times, Bustle Wellness and Therapy for Black Girls, among others. Her debut book, Bibliotherapy in the Bronx, released in April, and explores the modality of literature-based therapy in healing practice. Bibliotherapy in the Bronx.
Yeah.
You know, I have to do my annotations with it.
I love it.
Annotate it up.
I love it. And I love that the tabs match the colors of the cover. That's so dope. That's so fly.
But for those that don't know, peep the details in the cover, man. Peep the sneakers hanging at the skyline. Tell them about some of the details. Tell them why the details. Give us some cover details.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, if you're from New York City, if you're from the Bronx, especially, you know that we don't got grass. We don't got many trees, right? And so you see the concrete high-rise buildings, right? I really wanted to build on the imagery of the Bronx and the beauty of the Bronx, right? Because we know what sneakers on a high wire mean, right? That's just, if you don't know what it means, baby, look that thing up, because that's a cultural archetype right there. And I just love how Sarah Pinosalt did the cover, and I told her that I wanted the cover to be Bronx, but I needed it to be bookish. And so I let her kind of like play around with that. So I love how she kind of embedded like the spines into the high-rise buildings. And then of course, you know, I'm a light worker, baby. So we got to have the sun. We got to have the sun. Is the sun setting or is it rising? Depending on who you are and what it means to you, right? It might elicit a certain sort of vibe. And I love the pigeons as well. That was really important to me because pigeons are such a staple, right? They're part of our community in New York City, especially in the Bronx. And so, yeah, that's what it is. And I knew when I had spoken to the designer about or gave feedback about how I wanted the text on the cover, I needed it to be explicitly in the Bronx. And some people have asked me about that because the title was something I fought for. And the thing is that the Bronx could be any of our hoods, right? It's not just in the Bronx. It's bibliotherapy in any marginalized community where folks lack access to mental health services and supports, where it's a literary desert or where we have to fight really hard to get to the library to check out our books, right? So it's bibliotherapy in the hood, but my hood is the Bronx. And so that's the cover right there.
I really appreciate how much your publisher gave you so much access to have your creative input and everything. Because some authors, as you know, they don't get a chance to make all these detailed choices. They pretty much get like these 3 or 4 choices. Like pick one. Like this is what it is. So you having that ability is a blessing, and I'm glad about that.
Me too. That's one thing I will say about being a row house author. Like, I was really centered when it came to the cover that I wanted. Even with the audiobook narrator, I wasn't able to narrate my own audiobook because my husband accepted a position in Massachusetts. So we live here now, but Bronx is still home. And so when I found out that the closest studio was like a couple hours away, I was like, I'm not going to be able to do that with a full-time practice and 2 small children. I can't record. So they asked me who would I want to record my audiobook, and I gave them a few names of some of my favorite Black narrators, and I got Wesley Shaban. So shout out to Spotify, shout out to Row House Publishing for really taking my feedback seriously.
Can I speak on that? Am I allowed to speak on that real quick?
Yes, sir.
So, of course, me being who I am, anybody that follow my page, I love doing what they call immersion reading. That's playing the audio at the same time as you reading the physical book. The audio narrator nailed it. A phenomenal job, chef kiss. I was at work playing the book, like, oh, I'll give it M voice notes at whatever time it was. Oh my God, M, the audio was just crazy. So those that
She
love
did that.
audio, go out there and get the audio.
And you know what I love, Shantan, is that she has Spotify reach out to me to record some audio clips for her because she really wanted to stay true to the Puerto Rican and Black New York City kind of cadence of my voice. And so there's certain words, and also like I'm bilingual, so there are certain words that have a little Spanglish tang to it, you know. And like Wesley Siobhan is a consummate professional. Like she took it so seriously, and so that says a lot about how her work ethic and how seriously she takes her craft. You know, so I
Look at the
appreciate
power
it.
of that, because when those moments came with the bilingual part, I would have never known what that was just reading it. I'd have been like okay, like trying to give some context clues, I guess. But having that audio experience, I was able to flow with it and roll with it, you know?
Yeah. Thank you, Alexa. Alexa said that she loved the audiobook as well. Dope.
So, so in the intro, I read about this. You having the experience of being a part of the New York Times in essence. Most of us grow up, you know, you go into the newsstand, you go into the store, whatever it is, you see New York Times or Essence. In our community, Essence is major. I know some people that had some awards and everything, and they said that being in Essence trumped all the awards. How did it feel to have those opportunities?
Honestly, Essence was the one that brought me to my knees. Like I remember being a young girl, not having, you know, a library too like within walking distance, right? I would walk to CVS and pick up my Essence magazine. You feel me? Like, so to be featured in Essence is like a dream come true for my inner teenager. And like you said, it's major to our community, right? So like we know as Black folk, like people gonna take you a little more seriously when you say I was featured in Essence. You say I was featured in CNN Health. It's like, okay, there's something kind of like super clinical about that. Like, okay, that's what's up, like CNN. But you say I was featured in Essence, it's like, oh, okay, well, we need to, where's the feature? Because we want to read it, you know, and it mobilizes folks and it piques folks' interest. So that was a dream come true for me, truly.
So you went home recently. You did go home.
Yes, I
And
did.
I was seeing all the videos and the reels, and you had a amazing homecoming. You went home and did your book signing and stuff. What was it like doing the whole journey of writing this book and the editing and everything? I was blessed to be an ARC reader. I read some of the early copies with all the notes and everything on it. And then finally putting it in the people's hands, and you sitting there signing books and taking pictures. What did that mean to you?
It means everything to me. I get emotional because I feel like so much of that hustle and bustle to get home to market the book and do the appearances, it felt like it just flew by. You know, I was so focused on making sure like the kids had, you know, stocked up snacks and everything that they needed, that dad needed to just like hold it down on the home front to get there. And then once I got there, man, New York City showed up and showed out for me in a major way. When I tell you, I was not expecting, like, it's hard to talk about without getting emotional because I miss home so much. And I wrote this book for my community. And when I tell you, like, people showed up, and there's people who didn't even have tickets show up. They didn't even have tickets. And they was like, nah, we ain't here. Like, man, we sold out of books. You feel me? Like, it was just incredible. I had clients pop up on me, and I, for ethical reasons, I didn't tell my clients that I was coming back home to tour the book, because I felt like I didn't want to put any pressure on the therapeutic relationship. If I was like, hey, I'm coming home, I'd love to see you, come out to my book talk, that kind of is outside of the realm of the boundaries, right, of the therapeutic relationship. But I guess just through the Negro network, right, my clients found out I'm coming home, and they pulled up on me. And do you know, like, I had clients show up with their kids, with their partners, and I'm like, completely, I just wasn't expecting that. And it was so beautiful to just hug my people, and for people to say, like, thank you for writing this book for us. There are clients who are case studies in this book who came to these events, and so seeing them sit in the audience while I'm talking about the work that we've done, healing through literature, is just a full circle moment, yo. And this book isn't possible without community. This book isn't possible without all of the librarians and educators and healers in our hoods doing the work, because I'm a product of my community. And the way that I do therapy and the way that I integrate literature, poetry, and hip hop into my work is because of the clients that I serve, the families that I serve, the children and young people that I serve. So when I tell you, like, it just made this whole process so worth it to go home and to be embraced in that way, for real.
So me being from a small place is kind of different. I always have my people that Chicago or Compton or LA, wherever they're from, like their pride and when they're from is so strong. What does the Bronx mean to you? What does the Bronx mean to you?
Man, the Bronx to me is the birthplace of hip hop, a hub of artistry, creativity. I think that we look at places like the Bronx as being super hard and gritty, and it is, right? It is those things, but because of that struggle, so much beauty and artistry is born from that roots, right? Like, people from the Bronx, we're hustlers, we're survivors. We make shit happen. I think that there's a sensibility that comes with being from a place that, it's hard to access ease and softness. And so there's just a respect for our collectivism and our connection to our humanity that is so beautiful. Not being there now, living in a different state, in a different place. Like, it's funny because I just be walking around Massachusetts and people be like, girl, you're not from here, huh? Because everybody here drives. I got a whip, but I still walk. And even when I see like an addict on the street, I treat them with love and respect and humanity, as long as they ain't tripping. If they tripping, that Bronx gonna come out. But if I got a couple dollars here, let me hold you down. And so I think that comes with a sensibility being from New York City. We grow up around folks whose struggles are very visible, and you can see it on the street. We're walking to school at 7 years old alone, right? You're on the subway, you have a CEO sitting next to a homeless man. Like, there's just a respect for people's humanity. And I could go on and on about all of the different ways that being from the Bronx and from New York City have like made me who I am and impact a person, but that's the heart of it.
So you are with Row House Publishing, and I have what I call the sisterhood of Row House. The
Yeah, I
sisters,
love
right?
that. I
I've
love
been
that.
blessed over the years to interview multiple Row House published people. What was it like being amongst that sisterhood group? Going toward your book being completed, as far as the support and as far as like advice and things. What was it like being a part of a collective like that?
Absolutely. Shout out to Row House authors, Tamala Gordon, Ebony Janice Moore, Tina Strawn, Monique. Like, there's just T. Danielle Thomas. Come on. Like, I could go on and on. The sisterhood is strong. Okay. The sisterhood is strong. The best part of my experience being a Row House author is the sisterhood. And I think because I'm a therapist, I'm an introvert, I'm a reader, I'm someone who likes to be in my little bubble. I turn inward, and I think the sisterhood at Row House wouldn't let me hide. It was one of those things where it was like, yo, you're going to write this book and you're going to tell your story and you're going to keep it 100% you, and it's going to be hella Black and we're going to love it and we ain't going to let you hide. Even at the book events, like Tamala Gordon showed up, she surprised me in Brooklyn, which us uptown girls, Harlem, the Bronx, we don't go to Brooklyn. It's just too far away. You got to take like 3 trains and a bus. And, so the fact that she came to Brooklyn to surprise me meant so much. But I think my sisterhood with the Row House sisters has made me braver. It's made me stand 10 toes down on who I am, my authentic voice. Just the way that I show up is different because I know that I got like gang. It's gang now. You know what I'm saying? And so I would have been perfectly content in my life to like keep my work in my therapy room or write the book and then fall back. And I think having my sisters has been like, nope, we're pushing you. It's your time. It's your turn. You did all this for us, to support us, to talk about our books and to amplify us. And now it's our turn to pour back into you. And I just love them for that.
Yeah, I'm not being biased when I say that. Every Row House book I've read thus far, absolutely love those books. I suggest those books. I champion those books, and they got love from Sean P. Experience.
Yes.
Yeah. You mentioned your family a little bit earlier. You have a husband, you have 2 young children, right? So I know a lot of people, even before the book, even you in the social media space. I always told you in private, like, man, you going live and your kids coming in there or certain things happening. It's important because a lot of people tell me in private, like, man, I want to go live more, but it's not perfectly quiet, or I don't have a perfect backdrop. I don't have this ring light thingy, or they're caught up in these details when it's like you got to put it out there, right? So give some advice or suggestions to anybody out there watching it, and they have the children and they have the struggles in the family. They want to create.
I'm glad you brought this up because that's my hope, is that me showing up in my authenticity, imperfections, and all the mess and the chaos, it inspires another person out there, especially moms, to just show up and be seen. I think we have so much pressure on us to like show up a certain way, and it has to look a certain way, especially for Black women, because we're held up to these impossible standards. And so it feels like if I show up and everything is not pristine and perfect and the hair's not done and the makeup's not done, like right now the makeup is done, the lashes are on, but that's because I just came off a book tour. So I got my lashes done and I did a few things for self-care. But absolutely, in the beginning, I was just going live, when I could. I would be walking in the snow, taking my daughter to school, or cooking a meal, right? Or walking the dog, or, and I think it makes you more relatable. It makes you more human, because I also think, especially for Black women, we're often put on a pedestal of like, oh, it's like the myth, not the person. And I don't want to be nobody's myth, and I don't want to be on nobody's pedestal, because everything that I've earned up to this point has been because of sacrifice and hard work. None of this was given, you know what I'm saying? It was all earned. And so for me to just show up and pretend like everything is easy and it looks good, that would be false. That would be a misrepresentation. So I feel like so much of why I've built an authentic community has been letting people know who I am, what I struggle with. I was very upfront in the beginning because my son is also autistic, non-speaking. And so sometimes I'd go live and he'd be having an autistic meltdown in the background. And I'd have to be like, all right, y'all, I got to go check out my boy. I'll see y'all in a bit. And I'd go tend to him and come back. And I think people really resonated with that, because it's like, wow, like so much of our struggles are private behind the scenes in our homes. And she's really letting us see like what it takes to do this work and to build a platform and to build a brand. And I really appreciate that. And, there's always going to be the other side of that. So like I've learned a lot in terms of what I don't want people to see. I don't post my children on my public page. My private page is private for a reason. Sometimes I get folks wanting to connect, but I'm protective of my children. I don't show their faces. And these are all things that I've had to learn along the way, right? Like sometimes you're super vulnerable and people will try to exploit your vulnerability or misrepresent you or project, right? That's another thing about having an online presence, is that, you're not going to be for everybody, but you can't let that stop you, because At the end of the day, if spirit gave you a gift, you have to operate in that gift and let spirit deal with whatever negativity might come your way. You stay true to your work and your path. And so there is no bibliotherapy in the Bronx or Literacy NYC without my husband and my children, and that's in my community, and that's part of the work.
And the follow-up question to that is, what was your writing schedule like? Now that you said that, how did you get this even done? Is the magic question.
Facts. Because how, Jonathan? I don't know. Okay. I don't know how I got it done. Honestly, this project took me about 10 years to write. I didn't know in the beginning that it'd be a book. I'm just somebody who's always writing and reflecting and collecting, little anecdotes. And so a lot of this writing happened organically, while my daughter was napping or while I was breastfeeding or while I was up in the middle of the night, because, those of us that are parents, sometimes you just wake up, you got to go check on the kids, make sure the blankets are covering their little bodies and give them kisses and say a little prayer over them and go back to bed. So sometimes I wouldn't go back to bed. I would just grab my laptop and just start editing, revising, writing. So really a lot of this book was written in the midnight hour.
I know all about the midnight hour. That's
I know
my
you do. I know you do.
the God hour, right? So I love breaking down terms. The term bibliotherapy, tell anybody watching this, unfamiliar with any of this, first time seeing it, what is the practice of bibliotherapy?
Yeah, the practice of bibliotherapy is the use of literature to heal. So it's about reading the right book at the right time to help with processing difficult emotions, to help with shifting your perspective, developing a new perspective, to come up with creative solutions to problems, processing grief, um, life transitions. There's many different ways that a mental health professional in particular could incorporate the use of literature to support a therapeutic process. So sometimes bibliotherapy is prescriptive, where your therapist is just like, hey, we've been talking about this in therapy. I think you should read this book to help deepen your learning or your practice around what we're applying in therapy. Sometimes bibliotherapy is interactive, where your therapist might bring the book into the therapy room. And this can happen organically, where a client might say to me, I'm reading this book and let me tell you about my new fictional boyfriend. And I'm like, okay, sis, who is he? What's going on in the story? I want to know, right? Because anytime we're connecting emotionally with a text, we're gaining some insights into who we are, what we need, what we're struggling with. And at the core of every narrative is a conflict, right? There's always a conflict that the protagonist has to navigate, whether that be an internal conflict with themselves, an external conflict that's interpersonal with somebody else, or with society, with the world at large. And so when we connect emotionally to text, there are certain emotions that get elicited. There are certain insights that we develop based on our curiosity around why this is coming up for us. And then based on those insights, we can apply some new learning into our life, into our skill development, whether that be, reading a book and you're like, dang, like if this was me, I would have done that. Right? You learn a little bit about your conflict resolution style, your communication style, some gaps in your development where maybe you're like, damn, like I could have done better. You start reflecting on your life experiences based on the story that you're connecting to. And you're like, dang, like I could have handled that better. Or if it was me, I would never do this. Right. But it holds up a mirror to our experiences where we can reflect on things from a less defensive place, from an open-hearted space. And that's the beautiful thing about connecting with literature to heal, especially fiction.
So I told you before, like when I first met you years ago, you discussed bibliotherapy. For those that don't know, I've had my years in counseling. My master's is in psychology, my bachelor's in psychology. I never heard about bibliotherapy. I was so like, man, I wish I would have known that when I was in school. I would have loved to be able to use this for my clients back in the day, man. For those that don't know, give us a general idea of the intake process when a brand new person's coming in. When it comes to bibliotherapy, what is the intake situation like for a new person?
That's a great question, because bibliotherapy may not work for everybody. But if I have a client who's a reader and they're naturally engaging in daily reading practice as a coping skill, like I always say, our TBR is like our psychosocial support system for many of us who are avid readers and collectors of books. And so what I always do once I've determined that bibliotherapy would be an intervention that would work for a client, I conduct a reading intake. This is where I get a general sense of who my client is as a reader. What genres do you like? What format do you like to read in? Are you an audiobook reader? Are you a physical book person, an ebook person? I kind of just want to get a sense of what makes you gravitate towards literature. What kind of literature do you connect with? What was the last book that you read that made you cry? Right? I'm trying to get a sense of what helps emotions rise to the surface for you, because we live in a society where we're treated like machines and it's go, go, go. And we don't often get a chance to just be still enough to have a mindful moment to allow our emotions to be seen and released. And so I want to know, what's the last book that you read that you loved? What's the last book that you read that you did not finish? Who are the auto-buy authors, right? That you immediately, as soon as they release something, you're there, like, let me get that pre-order in. I'm trying to get a sense of how you engage with text. And so I also want to know, when you're reading, what are you visualizing, right? Do you hear characters' voices when you're reading? I'm really doing sort of like a developmental history of you as a reader, because this is going to help me understand how you connect to texts, and it's going to help me prescribe a book that's truly going to support our therapeutic process. And so let's say you're coming to me because of grief. You just lost a parent and you want to try bibliotherapy. Then I'm going to want to know, first of all, are you a fiction reader, a nonfiction reader? What's the last book that you read that made you think about the parent that you lost? Was your parent a reader? Sometimes I've had that happen where a client will say, let's say they're grieving the loss of their mother, and it's like, what, my mother loved to read the Bible. It's like, okay, well, what was her favorite scripture? Let's find a therapeutic way to incorporate her favorite scripture into connecting to her memory. Right. So like, there's so many different ways that you can get creative. But at the heart of it, my intake process is really about determining who my client is as a reader so that I can best prescribe a text that's going to elicit an emotional response.
So in the book, you had a breakdown in there when it comes to using nonfiction work and fictional work. I think a lot of us kind of have a sense of the nonfiction side when self-help, development, things like that. But like, how could fictional writing be used in a therapeutic setting?
Absolutely. Fictional writing is really powerful therapeutically, because when we're reading fiction, there's no pressure. It's just vibes. I feel like sometimes when it's nonfiction, especially if it's super academic, we put so much pressure on ourselves to just like engage with things from a concrete perspective. Like, we're trying to understand the history or understand the terminology, or there's something to be gained and we're just trying to like learn or fill in some gaps in our knowledge. I think fiction allows us to just immerse ourselves in story, which is really important, because as human beings, we're story thinking beings. Our whole psychology is set up of archetype and symbol and language. And so when we immerse ourselves in a fictional story, it really allows us to have an emotional response that's authentic. There's no fear that somebody is going to be judging us, because it's just us in the book. We get to have all of our emotions, whether they be shadow aspects or positive emotions, right? Like, how many of us can experience our rage without judgment, our fear, our grief, our jealousy, our envy, our self-consciousness, right? All of that gets removed when we're just immersed in a fictional narrative. And Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop talks about this in her work, where she says books are mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors, which is to say that when we're reading fiction, it's a mirror to ourselves and our experiences. It's a window, a peek into somebody else's experience, and a sliding glass door, which allows us to actually step into the shoes of another person and experience life through their lens. And I think that that's the power of reading fiction. There's a reason why studies show that when we engage with fiction, we're actually more empathetic, more compassionate, more curious. It strengthens our cognitive abilities, right? Like, there's so many scientific studies around why reading fiction is healing. But I think when we talk about it through a mental health lens, sometimes people forget that. Like, yeah, like, this is what we're uniquely trained to do as therapists, is to make the unconscious conscious. And so what better way to do that than through reading fiction. Most of the time when we show up in therapy, we're guarded because we're like, this is a new person, a professional asking me personal questions. I'm feeling vulnerable. But if we're having discussions about your grief, about your fears, about your anxieties through the lens of a fictional character, it feels less harrowing because the spotlight is not just on you.
Yeah, no,
We're
you.
talking about you through
Yeah, about them. Yeah.
Satoyan, right? Exactly.
Yeah.
And shout out to Kiese Lehman, his book Long Division. There's a beautiful bibliotherapeutic intervention that Dr. Lauren Cahill wrote based on long division. So for those Kiese fans, make sure that you tap in to that chapter.
It's funny you mentioned Kiese. Kiese was the very, very first guest I ever had on this platform.
I loved
My
that
first
show.
guest.
I
Yeah,
remember.
you sure did see that. Yeah, because your name came up in that show. Yeah.
I remember.
Yeah. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. So you mentioned in the book the 3 Ps process working with clients. Tell us about the 3 Ps.
Yeah. So the 3 Ps kind of go back to the reading intake question, which is when a client comes to me, I'm looking at their presenting problem. So why is the client coming to me? Their reading preferences. And then I'm making a book prescription based on their reading preferences and their presenting problem. So a client comes to me, they say, I'm freaking out because I'm pregnant. Right? Like, okay, you want to try bibliotherapy? Yes, bet. What are your reading preferences? I love poetry, right? So now I'm going to dig deeper to understand, well, you're pregnant. It's normal to be nervous, but what's coming up for you around this pregnancy? What aspect of becoming a mother is making you nervous? Maybe they'll say, I don't have the best relationship with my mother, and so I worry that I may not be the best mother. Okay, so now I have an idea of what's making her anxious. I have an idea that she likes poetry. Now I need to make a book prescription or a poetry therapy prescription to support the therapeutic work that we're going to do together in our sessions. What am I going to prescribe? Black Girl Call Home by Jasmine Mans, right? Excellent prescription for somebody who is maybe feeling like, am I going to be a good mom? I don't know why, because Jasmine Mans wrote an entire collection around Black girlhood, Black womanhood, coming of age, rites of passage, her own tense relationship and loving, tender relationship with her mother. So that's a poetry collection that addresses all of the themes that my client is coming to me with. And hopefully throughout a therapeutic process, I can get her maybe writing some of her own poetry if she connects to Jasmine's poetry. Maybe we end up having her create a little poetry therapy journal that she could pass on to her daughter, right after her daughter is born. So there's so many different ways that could look, but that's one example of how my 3 Ps would work.
You are killing these questions right now. Because these hypothetical scenarios, you're fleshing it out. But so many viewers have never maybe gone to therapy at all in their life.
Yeah.
And they're petrified, just wondering, like, I don't know what goes on behind that door. I don't know, besides what the stereotype is, I don't know what that's like.
Yeah.
And you kind of laying it out like this for people. They're kind of like, okay, I can do that, maybe,
Yeah. And you mentioned earlier in the pod that you were an ARC reader, but you were more than an ARC reader. You were a beta reader. And I don't know if you remember, but that's part of the feedback that you gave me was like, I want you to write and flesh things out a little bit more. Whereas if I've never been in therapy before, I could understand how you as a therapist incorporates this into your sessions with clients. Like, what does the actual process look like? And that was your feedback. So thank you for that.
Why, thank you. You had a phrase in the book I never heard before. Literature trauma. Tell us, what is literature trauma and how someone begin healing from it to rebuild their relationship with reading, if that's their case?
Yeah, that's a great question. I just was talking, I teach bibliotherapy at Queens College at the MLIS program. And my last class was actually about literacy trauma. And really, literacy trauma is about negative experiences that we've had along a life path as readers, right? So for a lot of us, literacy trauma starts at school because we're constantly being assessed about our reading or our lack of growth and development as readers at school. And there's a tremendous amount of academic pressure that's placed upon reading. I was one of those generation of kids that had reading choice. So, and I'm sure you and I are around the same age. So I went to school before No Child Left Behind, when George Bush was president and standardized everything. So I was one of those kids who earned the pizza party in first grade. You know what I'm saying? Based on how many books you could read.
Oh my God.
You know what I'm saying? You remember?
You trigger me right now. That was the lick. A little
Reading was
small person
lit back
prepared
then.
pizza.
We
A
have a
little
pizza
stars on the
every
book.
Friday.
They don't know him. They don't know.
They're not ready. They're not ready. But I think that that's what causes literacy trauma, right? Is like we make reading pressure. We take away a child's choice. We constantly nitpick at a child's reading development or lack thereof. We don't provide the supports that children need in order to determine what remediation they might need as readers, right? There are a lot of children who are dyslexic or who have different processing needs that are not being addressed, learning disabilities that are not being diagnosed in schools, and they're just being constantly assessed and pressured without the right supports. And so that's something that would contribute to literacy trauma, because ultimately then it becomes your identity of, well, I'm not a reader, I can't read, right? You may have been someone who was bullied in school for not being able to read. And so literacy trauma, it really starts in schools, I think. And also, like, if you grew up poor, right, you're not coming from a home environment where maybe you had access to literature or was surrounded by books. So you don't have that early foundation, and then you go to school and you're struggling with, literacy, and you're not getting the support that you need. And there you go. Now we have an entire foundation that says, well, I'm just not a strong reader. And so a lot of my work is around helping people to reclaim their identity as readers, because if you're reading, you're a reader, right? Like, I don't care if all you're reading is song lyrics or poetry or haiku, right? Like, as long as you're reading, you're a reader. And so it's about progress, not perfection. And I always tell my clients that. When I was a school social worker, I used to tell my students that, like, look, especially for my students who were ESL students, you come to school from a different country. Now you're in America, you're in third grade reading at a kindergarten level, but next year, now you're reading at a first grade level. So that's progress. That's major. And we got to celebrate that. Yes, you're in fourth grade reading at a first grade level, but remember, when you got here, you were reading at a kindergarten level. So let's celebrate the progress. That's huge, right? And so this is another reason why, as a clinician, I do use children's literature with adults. I get creative around my interventions because I always want to reinforce that in people, like, you are a reader. And I actually have that affirmation at the end of Bibliotherapy in the Bronx because I wanted to really drive that point home for people.
And years ago, I interviewed our brother Reggie Reeds, and he the one that liberated me, because before, I would always tell people, like, I wasn't really a reader growing up until I was a grown man, first starting to become a reader. And I mentioned, like, reading the Slam magazines and the Vibe, Double XL, the stores, all those things. And like you just said, like you were definitely reading if you was reading that.
Yep.
And looking back on the people that wrote those articles, they're scholars. They're all these things in their own right. These are very adult articles that you're reading in language and words that they're using. So, I wasn't reading the whole time, just not novels. I wasn't reading books,
And look at you now. It's an experience.
Yeah, it's an experience, right? It's an experience. So for a little segue, Emily, are you ready for a little halftime?
Yes, sir.
So I asked my sister Emily. She speaks about poetry and loving poetry. I said, do you still write? She said, I do a little something, something. I said, do you mind sharing a piece with us on the Sean P experience? So at this point, I'm gonna let Emily share with us a piece that she wrote.
All right. When Jonathan asked me that, y'all, I was nervous because I'm like, I'm teaching right now. I just launched my book. I haven't really been writing, but it reminded me that I have recently wrote a piece. For my book club, Readers Who Run with the Wolves, our book of the month for February was Imani Perry's Black and Blues, How a Color Tells the Story of My People. And I love that book so much. And a lot of times when I'm reading a book and it elicits strong emotion in me, I am somebody who I have book, reading journals. I write down my favorite quotes. I look at the footnotes and the bibliography to see where the author got their citations from. And sometimes I just write. And so I wrote this poem called True Blue after I read Black and Blues for the second time. So I will read the poem. True Blue. In the hush of harbor hymns, they brewed the knowing slow and deep. With roots and rainwater, bone and Bible, secrets they were born to keep. Ash on the doorstep, jars on the shelf, dreams stitched into quilted grace. They lit their candles in the dark and met the devil face to face. True blue like indigo dye in midnight skies on gullah nights, like bruises turned to blessings and the scent of camphor lights. They called on spirits who remember what the world tried to erase and made altars out of kitchen tables, healing in plain sight. This is no superstition, it's survival wrapped in prayer and smoke. The gospel of grandmothers who conjured freedom when they spoke. Their magic was a mirror, their faith a sharpened blade. True blue, we wear it still in every shadow they have made.
Bruh, come on, audience. Come on, audience. Don't be shy out there. Yeah, when you sent me that last night and I was sitting at work reading it, I was just like, ooh, she dropping bars. I was like line by line, emailing you back, like, man, the wordplay and oh man, it was just
Thank
beautiful. I
you.
love
Thank
that piece.
you.
I
And so
love
this
that.
is an example of something that I would do, right? Like I would do this with a client. I would encourage them to take a line from a poem that really hit them or that an image that really sticks with them and to write their own poetry. So like um I wrote this poem for myself in my own reading practice, but if I was going to use this with a client, you know, I might incorporate poetry therapy by having some discussion around the poem. So like what have your ancestors passed down to you that the world may not recognize as sacred? I would even use this poem to invite clients to reflect on rituals, recipes, songs, behaviors, right, that have passed through the generations that may feel ordinary but hold spiritual power in their lineage, emotional power in their imaginary, especially when we talk about our grandmothers, because you know we love our grandmothers. I read this poem to a friend, and the line, they lit their candles in the dark and met the devil face to face, really stuck with her because she just watched the movie Sinners. And so we had a whole conversation and process around that one line that I wrote, you know. So I think there's so many different ways you could get creative and engaging with poetry and making it like a therapeutic process for the client or the reader.
Since it is a hot topic right now, Emily, I would love to get you have seen the movie, you told me. I would love to get your take on the film, the phenomenon that's taking the world by storm, Sinners.
Listen, Ryan Coogler did the thing. Okay, this is his first independent project. I cannot wait for more from him. He's really putting Black speculative fiction back on the map for real. I feel like there's going to be so many dope films and books that are created as a result of this movie. Honore Jefferson just put up a post on Substack. I didn't have a chance to read it. I saw it this morning, but it's all about the lore that Sinners is built off of and blues music. And I can't wait to read what she has to say about it. But for me, honestly, like the symbolism was so rich. The ancestral veneration was so powerful. I think people think of this, some people are saying like, oh, it's a Black vampire movie. It's so much more than that. You know what I mean? I understand why we needed to use that pathway to tell the story. But I just want to go see it again because honestly, I'm still processing so much of it. How did you feel about it?
That is precisely how I felt. I saw it like the opening week. So for the past 2 weeks, I've been saying almost every day, today I'm going to see Sinners. Today, and then something always happens, right? But I want to see it again so bad because like the first Black Panther, I saw it twice opening week. Because there was so much happening, so many things getting said. You can't watch it one time and assume that you got everything. Like it's just too much layers. I was in the movie with my phone taking notes in the movie theater. I was in real time, like
Shout out to the Black nerds.
And then of course, you know, our other podcast, the Griot podcast, and we deal with the Griots a lot for years, me and my squad. So I'm inboxing them like, man, they talk about the Griots. I'm in there like, I was just getting so excited about every little thing I was seeing. So I want to see it again. And I love the book community. When we get excited, we start making book lists. So the amount of book lists going around,
and that's
bringing the spotlight back
bibliotherapy.
on literature, I love that.
Right? That's prescriptive bibliotherapy right there. People say, hey, if you really resonated and emotionally connected to sinners, here's some more books you should read. That's people doing bibliotherapy.
Yeah. So I had you read that piece for a reason. I love the entire book for sure, but one of my standout chapters is the book on the use of poetry / hip hop in your therapy sessions. I want to first say this: as a young man from the '90s and all that hip hop wave of that time, junior high, high school, I wish I would have had educators around me like Sean. You like this Tupac Snoop Dogg thing. Look what they're doing with these bars. And then like, how does that relate to the language arts? And how does that relate to, our sister Cree Miles? I love her video
Yes.
showing hip hop classic songs,
Me
but showing you
too.
literally the devices that's happening. Because those guys didn't even know what they was doing it when they was doing it. They're just writing the rhyme.
Yep.
They don't know it's a this and it's a that, which you technically call it. They were just doing it. If I could have somebody explain that to me, I would have had so many A's, like, bruh, being a hip hop head, So talk about using that in therapy.
Absolutely. Well, one thing about us, we're gonna listen to our hip hop. So I think, that comes naturally to people, especially young people, you know what I'm saying, who vibe with hip hop. And so just the thought that you can study the lyrics and understand the literary and poetic devices um, that the artist is using is a great introduction to the language arts and to helping folks understand the power of language, words as spells, incantations, affirmations, right? Like hip hop is born from struggle, the stories of those in the margins who were silenced. And so even understanding like the history of how hip hop became an art form is really important to young people. And so I'm so glad you shouted out Cree Miles because her blurb is on the front cover of the book. And I'm honored because a lot of people don't know Cree is known as the Black Emily Dickinson. You better Google her. And Cree is so talented. She's done so much for the Black reader community. And she's also an artist. Cree can sing her behind off. And so I remember before I ever had a public presence on social media, I followed Cree and her work. And she's just another phenomenal mompreneur. Me and her have a lot in common. She has 2 young children and an older son. And the work that she's doing to make literature fun and dope and showing the young people that reading is cool. And I love that you highlighted the hip hop videos that she's making because she's pointing out alliteration and metaphor and timing, right? Like all of these literary poetic devices so that young people can understand what these artists are doing. They're writing their ass off. This is not just, like you said, they're spitting bars. And like, that's the thing about poetry is that the language has to be so precise. You have to write with such specificity. And so I love that poetry therapy is your favorite chapter because that's really what that chapter is about. It's about the intentionality of how we use and engage with language, that we get to name ourselves. We shouldn't let nobody else name us. And especially as Black and brown folks, right? We're already living in a world and such an oppressive system that tries to name us and stagnate us and label us. There's so many misconceptions and stereotypes that we have to work against every day. And so what happens when you reclaim language and you say, that's not who I am, this is who I am. I'm gonna tell you who I am, right? That's why we love Wayne. That's why we love Nas. That's right. Like these are artists who write their behinds off and they know who they are. And I think anybody who gravitates towards hip hop, there's a certain self-possession that it takes to speak it with your chest and to take up space and to name yourself and to name the place and the location from which you write. And so that's really what it's about. I could go on, but
we love it. We love it. And the outsiders most times mistake the bravado and the things that it take to even exist like that. It take that look at me and look what I have, look what I am, look what I can do. It takes that to overcome so much adversity in these forces. It's gonna sound like that. And then whenever I actually win, you're gonna hear about it.
Period.
You're gonna hear about it, right? You're gonna hear about it, right? I'm gonna go to the libraries, Let's go to the libraries. Tell us about the importance in this day and time. Well, historically first, and then now. The importance in libraries, and then our librarians, man. We had something real crazy happening, like, 48 hours ago, 24 hours ago with Donald Trump and all this stuff. Tell us about the importance in these spaces.
Yeah, there's a whole section of the book that's dedicated to libraries as pillars in our community and respite, right? Like our collective well-being is tied to the library because the library is the only remaining place in our society that's free for all. The library provides not just access to literature, but to GED programs, to printing services, right? To access to the internet so that you could apply to jobs. To, like, I remember when my son was first diagnosed with autism and I was pregnant with my daughter, I didn't have very many places I could go because he was so colicky. Infant Toddler Story Time was our shit. We went every Wednesday and Friday, and I met so many of my closest mom friends at the library, right? As a young girl, not having many places to go where I could be safe after school or on the weekend, I would be at the library. And I'm glad that you bring up what happened recently because Dr. Hayden is not only the first woman to serve as Librarian of Congress, but she's also the first African-American librarian to serve in that role. And, you know, first of all, we know how Trump feels about President Obama. And Obama is the person who hired Dr. Hayden to be in her role. And so just like that, a random personnel clerk emailed Dr. Hayden and told her that she was going to be dismissed from her role. 2 sentences, a lifetime of achievement as a Black librarian in our society who's done major work. I had messaged you, Jonathan, yesterday because I was like, you know, a lot of people don't know the legacy of Dr. Hayden, that when Freddie Gray was murdered and schools were shut down and the riots were happening in Baltimore, Dr. Hayden is the reason that the public library stayed open so that children had a safe place to be while the riots were happening. I can go on and on about why Black librarianship is so central to my book because the work of our Black librarians often goes unnoticed or undermined or misrepresented or not represented at all. I write about Dr. Sadie P. Delaney, who is known as the godmother of bibliotherapy. I've been studying bibliotherapy my whole life. I had never seen her name, and it just floored me that in my research for the book, I was reading a letter to the Library of Congress, actually, that Eleanor Roosevelt had wrote. And she said something about the godmother of bibliotherapy. So when I furthered my research and I found Dr. Sadie P. Delaney's name, and I found out she was a Black woman, and I found out she was a Black social worker, I was like, hold up, stop the brakes. I need to learn more about Dr. Sadie. And I went to the Schomburg. I had the privilege to read through the Dr. Sadie P. Delaney letters. And when I tell you it brought me to my knees, it was so emotional because, like, there are poets from the Harlem Renaissance. Countee Cullen wrote her a letter thanking her for using his poetry to work with delinquent youth. She was the head librarian for some time at Tuskegee and worked at the Schomburg as well. I mean, it just was crazy to be holding these letters and reading about her impact and knowing that not only is she a Black librarian and Black social worker who's done and specialized in bibliotherapy, but I'm a Black woman social worker who's been studying bibliotherapy for over 15 years and had never seen her name. That's a problem. And so I literally my last class for my bibliotherapy course for librarians is next week. And I had this whole thing planned. I revamped that because I'm like, no, we're going to spend this last class honoring Dr. Hayden. I'm going to create an entire class that names her contributions to the field. I need every librarian in my class by the time it's over to know her name, to know why she's important, and to understand the depth and breadth of her legacy.
Yes, ma'am. I'm glad you said that because I was always studying our sister, Dr. Porter Wesley. And I know a lot of the classic scholars that a lot of us study when it comes to African history and things like that. She was the one getting different things together for them to write those books that we love. she was helping them point into a certain direction. Like, oh, you doing a book on this? You're gonna need these. And she was the one curating that thing. So we gotta always
Yes,
give respect and honor and homage to those librarians, man.
absolutely.
Yes, yes. So you're big in the bookstagram world besides being the author. Before
I'm
that,
not that big, but I hear you.
you got like 14,000. You can't have like double digit followers. That's not that big. Come on, man. But you host your own interviews on your page, interviewing a wide range of authors. Whenever you're hearing the host seat, tell me like, what's that like for you on this side, and like, what's some things that you gained over time conducting these interviews?
Yeah, I love that. That's my favorite thing is amplifying other authors and sharing their work and getting them to talk about their journey because we as readers are so empowered and uplifted, right? And edified by reading the work that we connect to. So I prefer that. Like I prefer that than to be in the hot seat, to be quite honest with you. But I know that about myself. And I also know that like it takes a tremendous amount of energy for me to become just have that like extroversion aspect of talking about myself and talking about my work. So I was very intentional throughout my book tour to only do this with people and in places that nurtured me. I didn't want to feel like I was stepping too far outside of myself to be like, hey, y'all, read my book. I'm an author. I'm popping. You know what I mean? Because like that's just not me. So I told myself that in marketing my book, I was going to one, use this opportunity that I am in the spotlight to amplify the people who poured into me, the people who've been doing this work in our communities at a high quality level already. There's a lot of people who I asked, like even when I did my Instagram lives, my publication week, they were like, really, Emely, me? Like, but I only have so and so number of followers. I'm like, girl, it ain't about followers. It's about impact. It's about your heart. It's about your soul, your spirit. It's about how aligned my brand is with who you are. And that's why I want you to interview me. Feel me? So like, that's been a blessing to be able to amplify people who I know are doing this work from the right place. Because we could get caught up in followers and, you know, wanting to be, who knows, right? Like, I feel like it's corny to even feel competitive in the book space because what are we competing for? Maybe we just reading. We reading, we building community. Like, if you feel like you need to be the queen of book talk, or I say that because it's like a catchphrase that triggers people. And I get it because, you know, publishers don't pay us for the work that we do to amplify books. And whenever they do, right, there are limited seats for those kinds of opportunities and it can get competitive and catty and phony, but that's not the vibe that I'm on. I really wanted to use my time in the spotlight and my book launch to amplify people who are, in my eyes, community bibliotherapists. So all that to say, I don't like being in the hot seat. I like being the one amplifying others. But it's been a journey to allow myself to be seen and poured into because um it's my people, right? Like I'm engaging in these conversations with people who I love, who I know love me, and that feels very um wholesome and fulfilling and restorative, and I'm grateful.
So along with the Bibliotherapy publication, you also have a healer's guide, a book club
Yes.
guide, and the educator's guide. Tell us why it was important to have these additional resources alongside of this publication.
Yeah, well, first of all, I will say when you publish your book as a debut author, especially when you publish your debut in hardcover, you know, it's expensive. The book is like $27.99, and not everybody's going to be able to afford that. And also because I'm a debut author and I'm publishing my first book in hardcover, it's less likely that places like Barnes and Noble are going to acquire the book. So I don't know how accessible the book will be to everybody in my community. And I also know that as a Black woman, scholar, academic, and healer, I needed it to be in hardcover so that it could be in certain spaces and places, right? And so there's like a tension between that choice that I made. But the reason I created the guides is because the guides are standalone. So if you're someone who wants to use bibliotherapy or learn about bibliotherapy and implement it in your work as a teacher, as a healer, or as a book club moderator, you can download these free guides and you can apply everything that I'm teaching in the book without having to necessarily buy the book. I still want you to buy the book, don't get me wrong, or borrow it from your library. It is in the library, y'all. But I needed to create something that was going to make this work accessible to everybody. And so that's why I created the guides.
Let me give you a laughable moment, but it's also a real moment about supporting you. So on Pub Day, which is recently, one of our brothers hit me on the phone in the inbox, right? He like, man, I pre-ordered my book. I went down to the bookstore and they didn't have my book. He was going off on the boy.
I know who you're talking about.
But he was serious, like, I want to support him. And I don't
ready to square
understand
up.
why his Pub Day and the book is not here. He was serious. He was serious. So I love the support and the energy, you know what I'm saying?
Listen, me too. Me too. He slid up in my DMs. A few of y'all did. Like, yo, I'm about to square up. Where is my book?
Where's my book? I paid for it. Where is that? The Pub Day. There's no excuses. Right?
I love that about us. I love that about us.
Yeah. So last question. This book is just fresh off the press. So I know it's kind of too far to think about, but like, you've done the process, you know what it takes, you know what it is, you got a routine now, everything front to back. Can we expect more books out of Emely, or is this a one and done, standalone, standoff? How do we prepare for this?
Baby, we got more books in us. Absolutely, we got more books in us. Yeah, man. This is just the beginning.
I love hearing that. Because I know a few books in my mind, I love those books so much. I'm like, I want another book from that person. But it's like they never wrote again. It's like, you never know, you know. So I'm glad you said that. You plan on bringing some more books.
I do. I got a couple things in the works. I'm not going to speak on it yet. Offline with you, I might. But yeah, I got a couple things. You know, I think about how much work, the years, the toil that it took to create this work. And I don't know, you know, when the next work will be complete, but I can tell you that the work is never ending. And that's the thing, like people have asked me, you know, did you have an aha moment where you knew this would be a book? And this book is my life. It's my life's work. So I don't think that there was one aha moment. I think I'm actually living the book. And so the book came out effortlessly. And so I think the same will be true with the next project where, you know, like you're pregnant, it takes 9 months for that baby to grow and then you push that baby out. And so I feel like we'll see what happens with this next project, but I'm excited about it.
I know for every single writer, every project is uniquely different. But I know for myself, for an example, that first book, it took me a certain period of time to make that first book. But like, once I did it, I'm like, wait a minute. So that's what the process like? I started being like, bet, I got it now. And so like the time it took me on that first one, it's like I'm cooking now, where it's like, I got a template. I know what to do. I know how to get it done. I got a process. And it's like,
and I love your books. I use your books a lot, especially with young Black men. You write so keenly from a man's perspective, from a Black man's perspective on mindset and self-power. And I just want to thank you for putting your words into the world so that the next generation of young men, you know, have a guide and a roadmap.
Man, I'm trying, you know, we trying over here, man. We trying. We do a little something, right? We do a little something. But thank y'all so much for taking the time out with us on the early Saturday morning edition of the Sean P. Experience. Anybody that's just joining for the first time, like, share, hit the button. I have our sister, Cree Miles, the next guest on the Sean P. Experience, June the 2nd. It's going to be an evening edition, like 7 p.m. in the evening. But Cree will finally, I've begged Cree for years, please come on the Sean P. Experience.
We ready.
I have actually a list of like guests I've been wanting for a long time. I'm just scratching them off. So I finally got Emely. And now I'm getting Cree on the show, man. So yeah, Cree going to be here.
I can't wait for that show. It's going to be a great show.
So it's about 3 or 4 more guests coming up already on the books. You'll see the flyers and everything when they roll out. But thank y'all very much coming to the Sean P. Experience and have a blessed weekend. Peace. All right.